Hello, good afternoon, good evening, possibly good morning, depending on where you're joining us from. My name's Mark Brannigan. I'm the tech behind the scenes of today's Lunch and Learn with the OPA. You may have seen me before. If not, and you're new to us, welcome. So I'm filling time a little bit just while we're waiting for Zoom to let everybody in. So it takes a little while, and I just want to make sure everybody's with us before we actually get into the main content for today. While I'm doing that, a little bit of update on how the webinar works. So if you've not been on a webinar before, you won't be able to open your microphones and you won't be able to start your video. That's by design, that's okay. And also we've disabled the chat because the Q&A is where you're going to put your questions in for today for Michael. So if you look on the bottom of your Zoom window, you should see a little Q&A button, square box with a question mark in it possibly. You might need to click on the three dots to find it. And that's where you're going to post all your questions today as we go through. And then I can filter through them and I can sort them out, put them in order, and we can ask them in a sensible order for Michael. So I think with that I can see the numbers are just about slowing down, which means that most people have now joined us. So with that, I'm going to stop this share and I'm going to hand over to Kurt, who's going to do some housekeeping for us. Kurt, it's all yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark. And welcome everybody to our Friday webinar and Lunch and Learn with Michael Harding. I'm looking forward to hearing what Michael has to say about art materials and his journey as an artist becoming a manufacturer of materials on paints. So I'm going to hand that over soon, but I just want to do a few announcements and housekeeping things so everyone is aware of what's happening. We do have upcoming deadlines for the showcase on August 15th, and I encourage all of our associate members to submit a painting for that. That's a great deal for our membership. You get to have your painting posted on the OPA website. You have the potential of winning a major, prestigious anyway, OPA Award of Excellence, and also you can have your painting for sale. So if any potential buyers see your painting on our website and are interested in buying it, they can reach out to us, and then we'll reach out to you to let you know. We have some upcoming events that you should be well aware of, which is the Eastern Regional, which is coming up in October. We're going to have a nice program there on October 11th through 13th with demo artists. So be aware of that. And of course, the Western Regional in Prescott at the Phippen Museum, and that's October 18th through 20th. So a lot of events coming up still throughout this year that you can participate in. And also be aware of the national show, which is going to be coming up it's going to be this year, next year in the 2025. It's going to be May 27th through June 1st in Bradenton, Florida. So have that on your calendars, and be thinking about what paintings you want to create to submit. That submission will be open November 1st, and we'll go through March 1st of 2025. So some things to keep on your radar. So now I'm going to hand it over to Susie, our board member and previous president of the OPA, who will introduce Michael Harding. Thanks.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. You know what? Oil painting is hard, and it is hard enough that we don't need to be dealing with substandard materials. And Michael Harding is in his 4th decade now of making a quality product. Some of it loaded up on my Tabaret back here. And Michael is going to be impressing you with his knowledge and his story. And so I thought, by way of introduction, I might just share a few little tidbits that you might not know about Michael Harding. One is that, and I have seen a demonstration of this, he can hum and whistle at the same time.
And sing.
Very wonderful rendition of How Much Is That Doggy in the Window that I think Simon Cowell is going to be knocking on your door here pretty soon. Apparently also, Michael has experience as a lumberjack, which I can't imagine being transferable much to oil painting, but maybe it is. And aside from all of that impressive information, Michael is a great conversationalist. He is very giving with his time and knowledge to students. He spent a whole evening speaking to a group of workshop students and had the magical ability afterwards to keep my husband up until 2 a.m. talking, which I don't even know how you did that. I think maybe wine had something to do with it. But delightful, Michael, and of course, Karen, the lovely and talented and amazing in every way. And without further ado, we are going to hear Michael teach us about his journey and this thing that we do and how to do it better through better materials. Michael, hi.
All right. Thank you, Susie. I just give me a thumb up if you can hear me, okay?
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Okay, great stuff. All right. Thank you, Kurt. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Susie. I can actually hum, sing, and whistle at the same time, but I don't claim they're very good, but I can do that. And maybe now's not the right time because we're here to talk about materials, but I just thought I'd brag that little bit. Okay, it's probably, for those of you who haven't met me before, as you can realize, I'm English. I live half in the United States and half in the UK. I've been making paints for, just over 40 years for artists. And the reason I got into it was when I was an art student back in the 1970s, I went to college studying fine art in a little place called Epsom, which is on the edge of London. And one day I decided to go up to the National Gallery, our National Gallery. And of course, I headed straight for the Dutch section. And I was looking at the Rembrandts and sort of pondering, why can't I paint like this? And I looked at the captions beneath each painting, and of course it would say oil on panel, oil on linen in each case. And the particular painting which drew my attention for me, which is the quintessential Rembrandt self-portrait, is the one that's described as a self-portrait at the age of 34, very characteristically, because I think it's been subsequently cut down with a rounded top. But it's a marvelous painting, and if you haven't seen it, you can probably find it online, or if you're lucky enough to be in London, have a look. Anyway, I was sort of in awe of the marvelous qualities of the paintwork, the brushwork, all aspects of Rembrandt's genius. And I was thinking, why can't I paint like this? Yeah, okay, I'm not a genius, but even the material looked decidedly different. And as I said, each little caption beneath described it as oil on panel, oil on linen. I was thinking, well, my oil paints don't look like this. So I went back to college and headed straight for one particular professor who was the sort of the materials guru of the college, a guy called Graham Beeching, and Graham's knowledge was extraordinary. And so I sat down with him and I said, Graham, I've just been in the National looking at Rembrandts, and there's something different about the paint. What is it? And he was like, yes, of course. And he said these magical words, Michael, you have to remember that at one time, artists used to all make their own paint. And of course, a little light went on, like, oh, this is interesting. But if they could make their own paint, perhaps I can, and perhaps this will be the missing link, if you like, to the genius bit. So he said, look, if you want to know more, just get the Ralph Mayer book, the Handbook of Methods and Techniques, and there's sections in there on grinding your own colors. And I did. And of course, at the age of 20, it's one of those moments where everything appears as if it's going to be easy. And the more I read, I thought, well, this is going to be like falling off a log. It's going to be so straightforward. So I made a modest investment in some pigments, the two umbers and Prussian blue, I think, were my first attempts. And I started hand grinding. Hand grinding is generally done on a Malloran slab. It's two flat surfaces which come together. And as soon as I started grinding the umber, I realized that I was starting to get the sort of the luminosity that I could see in a Rembrandt. I mean, forget the image, but if you sort of think about the background, say, of a Rembrandt portrait with the brown background, just think of it as flat color. Even that had a greater sort of luscious, fruity quality, which I couldn't normally see with my own store bought paints. And so the other more significant thing is that when I started to paint with the hand ground paint that I'd made, I was getting, I suppose, what we would call a bit of a breakthrough. And after a day or two, fellow students were coming to my studio area and going, "Oh, wow! Oh, you've had a bit of a lucky breakthrough. What's going on with this? Is it a new medium Windsors or someone else has brought out. What, what's going on? I said, oh, no, I'm making my own paints. And they said, oh, come on, tell us, what is it really? And I then showed them. And of course, these guys immediately said, oh, can we try some? So I gave them bits of umber to take away, and they went back to their studios with them. The next day, they were back again, literally knocking on my door saying, Michael, you need to come and see what you've done to our paintings. And I was thinking, oh my goodness, what's happened? Is it somehow burned a hole through like paint stripper, or what's going on? And sure enough, I went to their studios and they were saying, look, we're getting the same sort of thing that you're getting. You're getting this immediacy, the greater sort of luminosity coming through. And so I thought that this is marvelous, but I can make a few more colors. And then of course I had this idea, as I was coming up to the end of my 3 years studying fine art, what was I going to do until I was a discovered artist? So I had this idea, maybe I could make paint and just select a few of my friends. And yeah, that seemed a great idea rather than getting, say, bar work or waiting tables. And I was working away like that for a few months, just ticking along nicely, until the word started to get out. It was like the ripples on a pond. The phone rang one day and a gentleman introduced himself, and he just basically said, my name's Tim Miller. I'm calling from the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. I've heard about the paints you're making, and I'd like to meet you because we've got a project we feel you might be able to help us with. And he went on and elaborated. They're restoring an 18th century organ that Mozart had played upon. And it had been covered in lead white primer. And this had either been destroyed by fire or damaged, and they were wanting to replace it. So they commissioned me to make them something like 7 gallons of lead white paint. Now, the only problem, of course, in those days was that if any of you have ever tried the hand grinding, you'll know it's very slow. And to do it sort of properly, you might be getting 1 or 2 tubes an hour at the most. When I say, the studio size, about the size of my finger. The 40 mils, I don't know what that is in ounces. And not surprising, this was a very slow output. And instead of, I thought it might take me about a month to do, in actual fact, it took me about 3.5 months. And so all my time was now engaged making this batch of lead white. And then, of course, I got another call, and this time it was the Royal College of Art in London. Same sort of story. We've heard about these paints, mate, you're making. We'd love our students to sort of have an opportunity to try them, and gave me a huge order. So not surprisingly, I wasn't getting any time to do my own painting. And I then made I suppose almost a mistake by taking on overheads for a business, which of course is the critical thing. You have to, these running a business, and of course, even if you're selling paintings, you are in business, and all these sort of overheads and costs sort of hamper you down. And before long, I was sort of slipping into debt and wanted to get away from it all. And the years were ticking past, and I was getting older, and I wasn't doing much of my own painting. So I now was in debt with an advertising company for magazine art advertising I'd placed. And so I decided I got to get out of it. The paint making thing was all too much for me, and I quit. And by this time, it was now the mid-1980s. And a very strange thing happened. The day I quit, England decided to have a small hurricane which blew down all the trees across southeast England. And now coming back full circle to what Susie was talking about, the next day I woke up in a new industry, forestry. And I spent 4 years working with a chainsaw, rescuing all the trees which had been blown down flat. I would cut the branches off and the root balls, and then we'd haul them out with bulldozers, and I loved it. It was great. Great suntan to go with it, landscapes. And the thing was, although of course through and through I'm still a painter, so I'd be looking at the landscape all the time thinking, oh, that would make a great painting and so on. So I was still an artist. And that was it really. That's where I got started. But let's jump right into the actual material itself and to what makes my paint different. As I said, that luminosity thing is very, very important. Now, the key thing we do as a company now when we make paint is we don't put fillers in, we don't put artificial dryers in, so that the paint you have is almost like a concentrate. And this is, if you ask people like Susie who use my colors, what they experience, they will always say, well, it's just sort of vivid and sort of a great sort of luminosity. The reason for that is that on a microscopic scale, you have lots of pigment particles, which are sort of lined up. And if they're lined up with no fillers, it means that the light as it bounces off the paint surface makes a much more uniform wave of light, if you like, which comes to the eye. And that's really what's creating the greater luminosity. The other good thing about this, of course, is that the fact there's no filler in there means that the light fastness, because the more closer the pigment particles are together, if you imagine my fists are particles of pigment on a microscopic scale, the closer those pigment particles are together, the less chance it has for UV light to come and attack all the different surfaces of each sphere or whatever the shape of the pigment particle is. So fortunately, the more I do one thing, the greater I do the other, which is, of course, the greater the concentration of color, the greater the chroma. It also means the greater the light fastness. And of course, that's the bit that really matters to you artists. We know we can make paints that can last as long as the ones you see in national galleries, because we know how those paintings are constructed. And my whole ethos, if you like, is that I believe that if we can understand the material, it will make us better painters. And what I always try and sort of impress upon artists is that there's a certain path to walk down with oil painting. You can take a chance and step off that path, but as long as you remain fairly well on the path. I'm talking about things like the fat over lean principle and things like that. As long as you don't break the rules in a chronic way, always choose a very sound support. When I say a sound support, either a solid panel or a good quality linen. Please avoid those things that they pack into where you can buy 6 horrible canvases in shrink wrap, and they've usually come in from parts of the world that aren't concerned with the longevity of your paintings, and so that matters a lot. Now, when it comes to things like the fat over lean principle, and for those of you who don't know, I'll run through it very quickly. Oil in the form of oil paint, when it dries, it actually increases in volume. So it absorbs oxygen from the atmosphere, combines with it, and actually technically polymerizes, or cures is probably a more simple way of describing it. Of course, when we normally think of something drying, we're thinking about the evaporation process where water evacuates and you're left with a residue. Oil paints are different because it absorbs the oxygen from the atmosphere. Now, another aspect of that is therefore that it can expand. Now, the oilier your oil paint is, the greater that expansion. Now, that matters. So which is a fat and which is a lean? If you take 2 tubes in your hand, supposing I've got a lead white in my right hand and say a magenta quinacridone in my left, you'll notice that there's a very distinct difference in the weights. That is because the lead one has a very low oil content and therefore it's considered lean, as if it's meaty. The other guy, the magenta, which has a very high oil content, therefore is considered fat. So the principle is this: if you have, supposing I did a painting and decided to make my lower layers out of my magenta and troweled it on nice and thickly, sort of 1/4 inch thick, it started to dry, and then 10 days later I decided, I'm going to put some really big dollops of lead white on it. That totally contradicts the fat over lean principle in terms of you're now doing lean over fat. Now the problem is, of course, that as that magenta dries more and cures, it expands more. And as you can imagine, if you've got a very lean paint above, which is not going to expand much, it's going to be flexing underneath. And of course, 2 things might happen. One is that it might cause cracking to come up through the lean one above. And of course, because it's now got a layer which is expanding, because you've allowed it to dry for a few days, the skin underneath will perhaps behave as a separate layer. So you might, after sort of 30, 40 years or so, find that your lead white flakes off. Not to be confused with flake white, that's another story. It might delaminate, come away. If you paint it the other way around so that your lead white is your lean layer underneath, then of course it acts as a foundation, and that is the principle of the old lead white primer. So always try and be mindful that your lean colors are underneath. I only see problems generally when people really break the rule in a very extreme way, like I just described. Most of the time, it is quite forgiving for us. If you're painting in one go, so that you're painting wet in wet, then it sort of, how can I put it? It doesn't have the significance so much. It's when there are separate layers and you're allowing those layers to particularly dry, and then that hostility between the oil contents will make a difference. By the way, I forgot to stress at the start, if anything I say is unclear, or if you want to ask questions, of course, just send them straight in and I can either re-elaborate or go over something again. But anyway, so that's the simple sort of thing where I talk about how we, I also believe very strongly in making the material your friend. As Susie alluded to in the beginning, painting's very hard, so don't make it any harder than it really is. You want to make all those materials work for you, not against you. So you don't create another hurdle to cross, as it were. You've got to love the material. Sometimes artists will say to me things like, well, which colors should I use? As if somehow they are a special case and that their choice of colors are going to be different from someone else over there. And I would say to artists, well, look, if you stand in front of one of our stands and looking at all the tubes, and if you remember, of course, every tube's got a real color strip on of real paint, where you find your eye going towards, because it finds a color interesting, those are the colors you should choose. If you think about it the other way around, it's very logical, because if you look at a stand and think, I don't like that color, I don't like that color, and I don't like that color, well, you wouldn't pick those up and decide to make your painting. So it's a sort of elementary thing that choose colors which you like the look of, because they're going to be the ones that are going to entertain you. And I always say to artists that producing paintings, you're actually producing a bit of entertainment. You have to, you have to entertain that artist, that viewer's eye, as they follow their way around the canvas. So it's the same thing for you. If you can produce a painting which you found entertaining, as you've done, of course, it's a greater chance that your viewer will also feel the same way. And another thing I always, dare I say, tell artists off for a number of occasions is, if I go to a studio and I see complete disorder and chaos on a palette, I mean, for me, the first rule I ever really learned about painting was, if you want to create order on your canvas, if you start by creating order on your palette, then you have a chance of transferring the one over. I mean, it's sort of logical in a way, but you'd be amazed. Sometimes I find that people have just got such a turgid mess of color and stuff, and they're just making the whole event much harder, and they're fighting the material because they've got dirty brushes or a dirty palette. And what we're looking for, of course, is the spontaneity, and that moment where you almost time travel when you're painting. You don't realize where the day's gone. It's just gone. And then you step back and you look, wow, did I do that? That's what we're after. That's what I call the magic. And that's when the magic comes, when you're not having to be so mindful of the material, because it's painting the painting for you. And you just let the brakes off and freewheel. And that's I think it also, you do your best work when you're feeling good about it. I'm a tormented artist. I find that I can't paint for long periods of time because I find it exhausting. It's masochistic, and I think you're all mad for doing it. But anyway, that's one of mine in the background. I did that in COVID and the lockdown. You can probably see a bit of it there, and I've got another one over there. So if you don't know, that's my sort of, it looks like an LSD thundercloud, doesn't it? But anyway, I just sort of, for those of you who might not realize, I'm still a functioning artist. I don't claim to be any good. Now, the couple of pointers I think it might be worthwhile to, let's get back right onto the material itself. Some of you may not realize that there's a danger of spontaneous combustion from oil paint. Normally when I talk to a group like this, I'll ask the audience of 20 or 30 people, put up your hand if you knew this, and you can invariably see that only about half of artists know this. And I think it should almost be lesson number one, the day that you take the cap off your first paint tube. When you clean up, you must be very, very careful with rags particularly, and paper towels, but specifically rags. And this is because when oil paint dries, cures, it actually produces a little bit of heat. And of course, if you've got a whole bucket full of rags that have been there for days and they're all at different stages of drying, that heat can't escape. And you'll remember from school chemistry days, more heat, more chemical reaction, more heat. And in my 40 plus years of paint making, I've had 2 fires. The first one nearly put me out of business because the people who were providing me accommodation and space in London, a store by the name of Atlantis, understandably, when they realized that oil paint can combust, they didn't want me there, and I had to vacate, and that was a very challenging time indeed to have to sort of move with little money to invest in things like that. So if you produce oily rags, you should either put them in a bucket and submerge them in water, get them out away from your studio, your home, and everything like that. I sometimes will actually just burn them. I've got an old discarded barbecue, and I'll put a handful of rags on at the end of the day and just set light to them. Step back, don't inhale the smoke for obvious reasons. Once they've burnt once, they can't burn twice, and then you get rid of them. Other matters that, I mean, if there's any questions at all on this and toxicity always comes up. I always impress upon artists that if you're working in the studio and you get your hands dirty, of course, make sure that you wash prior to eating and drinking. Something can only poison you if it gets inside you. Oil paint itself does not produce any vapors that are considered toxic. For instance, if you've got a lead white oil paint, as long as it stays on the palette or on the canvas, it's not as if somehow the lead's going to come into the air and you're going to inhale it. The only way it can do that is should you sand an old painting, which I don't recommend anyway, because start a new one. If you're trying to reuse a canvas, that's just, you're going to be again contradicting the fat over lean principle. Don't do it. Respect your craft more. Get yourself a new canvas. Start afresh. The only way that paint can really poison you if it gets inside you. So don't let it get inside you. For example, if you've got paint all over your fingers and you've got a burger or a sandwich in your studio, then of course there's a chance that minute amounts of paint could come down and be eaten, for instance. And the other one, which we've all done, is of course if you've got a coffee cup there, and out of the corner of your eye you've got your paintbrush, and you think you're going to your solvent to rinse your brush, and 10 minutes later you take a swig of coffee, and of course you realize that you've now just swigged a whole load of paint or something like that. Those are the sorts of things that can happen. Some of you, of course, like to wear the nitrile gloves. I mean, I personally, when I'm paint making and painting, I don't bother. I get absolutely covered in paint, both in the making process and in my own painting. This organ of the body here we call skin is very good at what it does, and it's designed to keep everything from viruses out to bacteria. And if it didn't do it well, we'd all be dead. A pigment particle is a non-soluble little lump of color, and it's huge compared to the size of, say, a virus or a bacteria. So as I understand it, and I've even asked my American toxicologist about this, as whether it's wise to say this, that pigments cannot penetrate through the skin. They can, of course, be ingested. Now, the other thing you should be careful of course, is getting solvents in your skin, because those can. So, yeah, I mean, just be sort of sensible in the studio about things like that. Should you be a smoker? You've got a double risk there. Certain colors, like for instance, the cadmiums, if you were to get cadmium paint onto the side of a cigarette, burn and inhale it, that's probably the most poisonous form. So as if being a smoker wasn't bad enough, you're now giving yourself the double whammy, because you're inhaling cadmium oxide straight down into your lungs. Not good. And funny enough, actually, some years ago, I was doing a workshop in Australia, and I had a gentleman sitting in front of me, and he was, a nice big Australian guy, covered in tattoos. And he said to me, "I want you to talk about toxicity. I'll wear those gloves." And I just looked at him and started laughing. He said, "What are you laughing at?" And I said, "Well, you've basically impregnated your skin anyway with pigment. Why are you worried?" And he went, "Oh, didn't think about it like that." So, I mean, there is evidence nowadays that, particularly with the female body, that certain pigments from tattoos are migrating and congregating. Surgeons are spotting that they're actually seeing the colors of tattoos located in certain female reproductive organs. So there's something for you all to think about. I'm not saying you shouldn't tattoo yourself. That's entirely up to you, but it's just one of those considerations that pigments can't harm you if they don't get inside you, but there we go. Other things I'd like to talk about today. We do a number of mediums as well. Often artists are under the impression for some reason that they have to use a medium. You don't. Paint, we generally make paint so that it can come straight from the tube and be completely usable. And I think that's probably how most of you generally function. However, there's a sort of school of thought with some makers that you have to use their mediums as if they're somehow activators. You don't. I mean, clearly from an artistic point of view, if you can achieve onto the canvas surface what's in your mind's eye without using a medium, then why further complicate it by adding another potential hurdle of risk by adding a medium? So you don't actually have to have a medium. We, of course, do the normal things, the oils and the resins and all those things, and variations of glaze mediums with Damar and so on and Standor. We do all those sort of standard things. However, I'd like to talk also about a new one we've developed, which we've managed to christen as our miracle medium. Now, as I've talked to artists for so many decades, the one familiar request that they all make, or you guys generally do, is there a medium that I can paint with for either the cleaning up process or as a medium to go in my paint to thin my paint that won't give me headaches, is non-toxic, non-flammable, no headaches, doesn't have any unpleasant smells. I mean, I personally love painting with turpentine, but I know obviously that can be harmful if you're breathing in that all day. So we started researching this to see if we could find a material, and believe it or not, we have, and we've managed to christen, as I say, miracle medium, because for me it is exactly that. It thins and increases the flow of the paint. It's 100% non-toxic. Should you inadvertently taste it, you'll regret it. It tastes disgusting. It's completely non-flammable. If you have a piece of newspaper and you screw it up and set light to it and pour the miracle medium on it, it puts it out. It's vegan. It's completely 100% biodegradable. It's 100% vegetable matter. And I had a couple of paint chemists working on this for me for 3 to 4 years. So as you can probably imagine, I'm not going to divulge exactly the vegetable material it comes from, but it's 100% vegetable material. Subsequently, we've developed a line of mediums where we can actually replace the turpentine. So for instance, now we have glazing mediums and have replaced the turpentine. This miracle medium will also dissolve Damar crystals. So it allows us to really play there, actually. And it means that you can travel with the little bottles, and although don't try and take them on the plane with your carry-on in the hold luggage, it's as non-toxic as water. Our toxicologist evaluated and said, should anyone ever swig a bit down, all you really got to do is just watch them. That's just observe. That was the only advice given. It's not seen as a medical emergency where you have to shoot off to hospital or start inducing vomiting or anything ridiculous like that. So that'll be coming to the US imminently. I know Susie and 1 or 2 other people have tried it. We recommend no more than 10% of the actual paint volume added. And the reason for that is we found that if you add more, it tends to slow the drying process down. We're also bringing out one which would be a faster drying one. And I make no apologies for that, like one of our glaze mediums. And we put it very clearly on the container that it does have dryers. Otherwise, we can't bend the laws of physics. We don't put dryers into our paints, but we put them in 1 or 2 of the mediums. Now, have we got any questions, Mark, or am I totally on my own at the moment?
No, there's plenty of people here and there are lots of questions. So first of all, so there's been quite a few questions already in about the miracle medium. So you're saying it's when is it going to be in the States? When can people buy it through the retailers in the US?
I would like to say that within 1 month. We went through a business change. We've just changed our American distributor, and we're now going to be distributed by a gentleman called Gregory Daniels. Some of you might know Gregory also because he's the US distributor of Da Vinci brushes. So at the moment, we've just shipped a whole load of materials to him. He will be taking the miracle medium within the next month or so, and then it'll be out to the stores and the mail order places and everything like that. I know I've been promising this for quite some time. when we do the next OPA show, we'll intend to have plenty there for people. And I think that Liz is even setting up a system where people can get a sample from us, which we discussed. So that will happen as well. I think the attendees of today will be able to claim a bottle of the stuff, a little, 100 ml. So it'll be shortly is the answer to that.
Okay, and Deborah's asking also Canada, obviously. So
yeah, Canada as well. We function with the same, I should say, North American distributor. My apologies there. Yeah, it's Canada as well. Will be distributed by Mr. Daniels as well. So we've got quite a number of stores representing us throughout Canada. So in fact, you can do us a big favor by asking your stockists if they can get it, and then of course it'll galvanize people to get onto Gregory Daniels and place orders that way.
okay, that's great. And just to clarify again, because we've had a few questions. So the toxicity of the miracle medium, is it at all toxic?
It is not toxic in any way that we know. I have to sort of do that caveat. It's just simply not toxic. If I had a bottle of it here now, I wouldn't swig it actually, because no, it's just disgusting. But it has virtually no odor. It's a very, 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 very slight. Most people sniff it and go, oh, there's nothing. I know Susie's there. She's tried it. Maybe she'll attest to that. It is, yes, it's completely non-toxic and no headaches, no reactions. No, we've been selling it in the UK now for probably a good 6 months, and thousands upon thousands of people have bought it, and no reactions so far. And it means that you won't have to worry about traveling with a solvent that's technically flammable. I mean, a lot of these odorless spirits and things that companies make, if you read that small print on there, it will say ventilate your studio. You won't need to with this. It really is 100% organic material.
Okay, that's great. And final question on it, and I'm going to carry on with it in a minute, is does it yellow in the same way that some of the other oil-based mediums might?
We've observed no yellowing at all. I mean, when I was doing the tests, and we do a number of tests with it I've been playing with it for about 4 years, and I know that doesn't sound very long, but where it comes to light fastness, we have a special box of UV lights that work on a 10-to-1 ratio. So for a year in the box is the equivalent of 10 years out in direct sunlight. And we've noticed no change. What we do with and without test, because of course some pigments will change. And it's just that nothing's 100% light fast, nothing. So it makes no difference. I mean, the particular color I played around with a lot was Naples yellow. And I found that if I put down a section of paint with it and a section of paint without it, allowed them to dry, put them in the light, 1.5 in the light box, there was no difference that I could see at all. There was, even when it was in there for a year, there was no appreciable change whatsoever. It, in excess, as I said, can slow the drying. That's the only aspect we've come across that people might have a problem with. The other thing is that a lot of people sometimes they take a white canvas and they, whatever term they like to use it, knock it back, knock it down, and they'll put a wash of color over it. That, of course, means at that point they've put a lot on, which is more than the 10% by volume of paint we recommend. So in that context, it probably isn't great. If you're going to do that, use the minimum amount. Most people usually use with an umber just to get, or a sienna-y color, just to get to knock the canvas down. So minimize that part. You might find that is slow to dry because you might be up into the sort of 75% area when you're in that particular technique. So that's the only application that I say might not work for people. We're going to be very generous with it in samples at OPA. So I'd love people to try it. I think you can see why we decided to call it a miracle medium, and something that is non-flammable, non-toxic, no headaches, and actually helps the painter. You can, of course, just use it for cleaning brushes. Choice is yours. But we've brought out a range of mediums as well where we can replace turpentine, so that all our original mediums are also now made with a miracle medium. We're doing the old ones as well, but we've got a new range of miracle mediums, as it were. Any more questions?
Great answer. Yeah, oh, there's loads more questions. I'm going to do one more on the miracle medium. Interesting one. So, two questions. Leah's asking, can it be used in glazing?
Yes. I mean, we're making a glazing medium specifically for you. The glazed medium will have a dryer in it, so it counteracts that slowness that I was saying. Yes, it is very, very useful for a glazed medium. You could make your own glazed medium from it by acquiring just the straight, neat miracle medium and adding it to things like stand oil. And as I said, if you would like to make up your own mediums, you'll find that the same ratio of dissolving Damar crystals into it will work as well. It just swaps out the turpentine very, very nicely.
Okay, another question. So you mentioned that if you go above the 10% by volume, it can slow down the drying. Is that a way to keep the painting open for a bit longer if you've got a large painting that you want to work on for a number of weeks, months?
Yes, thinking about it, yes. I mean, there are other ways that you could be. That's a great question. Some people, of course, like the paint to remain open so that they can revisit the painting day after day and reblend and rework areas. Yes, absolutely, and I would expect it to. It will slow the drying down. We are, as I said, we are bringing out a faster version as well. I think it's one of those things you have to explore for your own technique rather than me saying, yes, that'll work for you. Give it a try and see. I hate to tell people this will work, and then of course someone will come along and say, well, I used it in this context, and I then have to backpedal and say, oh yeah, I see what you mean. It might not in that. Just try it and see. The other thing, of course, is that we put on the sides of our tubes the speed of drying of each individual pigment. For those of you who don't know, certain pigments make paint dry very quickly. For example, iron-based or cobalt-based, cobalt blues dry quickly, therefore, and colors like burnt sienna or transparent red oxide, because they've got loads of iron in. Those metals have almost a catalytic effect on the oxygen to be absorbed, so they're going to be fast dryers. So if you want your painting to dry slowly, of course, avoid colors which say fast drying on the side. So you'd be looking for things like, alizarin crimson. I know alizarin crimson is always a debate for the light fastness boffins amongst you, but that's another discussion. Yeah, select colors which you know to be slow drying. If, like for instance, we do a titanium white and safflower oil, that takes about twice as long as the one in the linseed oil to dry. So again, make these materials your friends. If you're thinking your technique is the one where you don't like the paint to be dry in 24, 48 hours because it's summer, then choose colors which are going to be slower drying from the start. Paintings should always be dried in a good light. This is a bit of a tricky one, because to keep your painting looking fresh, like take the one behind me where the snow on the mountain is. Of course, I wanted that to really zing and stay a vibrant, nice white. So I deliberately dried that painting in direct sunlight. If you dry a painting in darkness, it will take on that dark, murky color that we've seen with oil paintings. And you can do an experiment with this. You know, if you were to take, I don't know, one of the, it's got a sheet of paper here, but pretend this is a canvas. If I painted this canvas all titanium white in linseed oil, and then I cut it in half, and I put one section of the canvas over on the windowsill to dry in nice good light, and this half away in a dark cupboard. And of course, the thinking is normally you want to put the painting where the cat hair isn't going to get on it, the kids aren't going to bump into it, no one's going to knock into it. You want to put that away in a dark cupboard so it's safe to dry. It's the worst thing you could be doing. You'll find that after about 10 days, of course, they'll both be dry. And as you put the two halves back together, the one which was dried in the window will be crisp and whiter. The one which was dried in darkness will have a yellow cast to it, and it'll be very distinct. The good news, or most of the good news, is that when you take both halves and keep them on the windowsill in good light, the guy that was dark, because it's gone dark because he dried in the darkness, he will start to get lighter and clearer looking, but you never get back to exactly the same. So to put a painting to darkness to allow it to dry will actually permanently handicap it. It doesn't matter, of course, if the whole of that painting had been done with predominantly darks, you'll never notice. It's only, for instance, if you're doing a portrait of someone sitting there with a white shirt or a white top on that you want to keep really crisp and white, then in that context, it can matter. So dry your paintings in a good light. There's another thing you can do, which I had a lady some time ago in England did, where she stood a painting against a wall and put another one in front of it, so it created a shadow. And she actually ended up permanently creating a line of where the shadow was. And when I was able to show her, this was written in, for instance, the Ralph Mayer book, this is the nature of oil paints and you have to dry. Then she started to understand. It was one of those moments the penny dropped. And this was a lady who'd been painting probably the best part of 50 years. And so we're still all learning. No one completely understands why that effect takes place, but it's a fact. I always look at linseed oil as being one of Mother Nature's gifts to us. It's a wonderful glue for pigment, and hence being a paint. Nothing's perfect. Anyway, what else have we got, Mark?
So speaking about the white paint drying stuff, so titanium white with linseed oil or with safflower oil, which is likely to yellow, and what's the when would you use the linseed oil over the safflower oil?
Well, as I said, if you're painting someone, say he's got a white shirt and you really want it to stay white and crisp, and of course, if you want the paint to remain open, the safflower-based one, the titanium #1, is slower drying and will remain whiter. It's not as if they've yellowed, it's just that the natural color, if you had two bottles here, one with safflower oil, one with linseed oil, you'd immediately notice that the safflower one is paler. The linseed oil, of course, has got that more amber color, which we're used to recognizing. And what tends to happen, particularly with titanium white, oil doesn't tend to like staying incorporated within titanium white. And so what happens is the oil tends to come to the surface of the paint. So you'll end up with a glaze, if you like, of the actual oil color itself. The pigments hasn't changed. It's still as white as can be. But of course, it's now got a glaze of oil over it. And of course, you're seeing more apparent thing. The other difference is the safflower oil is very slow to dry. As I said, it's at least twice as long. So the linseed oil I regard as sort of normal speed drying. The only other difference is that the linseed oil makes a stronger paint film slightly. I'm only talking like 10% physically stronger, but those things matter in terms of flexibility and strength like that. I hope I've answered that question enough.
You have, yeah. Brilliant answer, thank you. We've had a few people actually coming in asking again about the fat over lean principle, and how that relates to the miracle medium in terms of does it affect it? Is it obviously you're not revealing what the contents are, but does it count as being an oil based in terms of the fat and the lean within it? So can you go over that again for us?
Yeah, I would say that it would be considered a fat because it's a liquid. The only things which really could be a liquid and considered lean are ones which are going to 100% evaporate. And unfortunately, things like mineral spirits, I've noticed that they cause embrittlement, particularly in large amounts. You can notice this when you clean up a bucket which has had paint in. If I wipe around with mineral spirit and there's still a smudgy color, the next day I come back when the mineral spirits have evaporated away, you can almost rub it out as if it's got a chalkiness to it. And this is because linseed oil, if you were able to see linseed oil under a very powerful microscope, it consists of long chains. When you add a solvent, it tends to cut those chains, and that gives it more flow. Unfortunately, when those mineral spirits and things like that evaporate off, the chains don't reform. So you've actually weakened the oil, if you like, and that's why you can almost brush the paint off. So I always urge artists not actually to paint with mineral spirits or anything like that because it's harmful to the paint. The less intervention of things into your paint, the better, because then there's less chance of things going wrong. The more you make it a cocktail of stuff, you know, a bit of this, bit of that, bit of this, the more likely you're going to have one of those things won't behave accordingly. And so I urge not to. Coming back, okay, fat over lean principle. You have to have your leaner layers underneath in the lower layers with your oily layers on top. We have a section on our website which describes it, but I always find that the Ralph Mayer book, I keep referring to the Ralph Mayer book because it's our Bible. Chapter 3 onwards is just so usable. It will explain in far better terms than I can in the seconds and minutes we've got here, the fat over lean principle. But essentially, you don't want to be burying your oily colors with a very lean paint, because as it moves and flexes, it'll undermine them, and that's the problem. Think of it another way. It's like building a house and making your foundation out of rubber bricks. And of course, if your foundation moves around because it's rubber, the cracks are going to go up through the building, and that's effectively what happens with a paint film. If you paint Alla Prima sort of all in one here, it tends to dissipate this as a risk, because then they're all sort of intermixed, and it'll dry as one as opposed to different layers. You know, if you're painting in a method where you're like, if like the old masters used to, where you build up layers, let them dry, and then perhaps start applying glazes, then to be coming back on over the top with a really stodgy, lean chunk of paint, like a straight titanium white or a straight lead white, or you can always tell the lean ones. They're the ones that are heavy in your hand. If you go into your paint box, just do this with a couple of them, you'll notice that they're different weights, and that'll tell you the oil content. And that's the quickest way. We also put it on the side, whether it's low, high, or medium oil content. Hope I've covered that enough. Incidentally, you can always email if I haven't been specific enough today, oilpaint@michaelharding.co.uk. You can find that connection from our website as well. Our website's got an abundance of useful information. I invite you all to please come and have a look round. Mark, did I cover that again, do you think?
You did, yeah, that was great. I'm just going to stick with paints and the surface underneath them. So there's a question about putting oil paint over acrylic paints.
Yeah.
What's your thoughts on that?
In principle, it's okay. You don't want to do it the other way around, because obviously the acrylic will dry and be a layer, and so you would be encapsulating undried oil paint beneath. You certainly don't want to do wet into wet. You'll notice that there are acrylic primers. We make acrylic primers, non-absorbent acrylic primers, specifically designed for your oil painting so that the colors don't sink. I mean, the one consistent complaint I get generally from oil painters is when they do a painting and 24, 48 hours later, the colors have all sunk. That's invariably because the coatings are porous and they've sucked the oil out, and that's why paint sinks. We've developed our acrylic primers, non-absorbent acrylic primers, NAPs, and we do whites and various colors that don't do this. They're specifically for oil paint. You can paint even acrylic upon them. So the actual idea of painting oil paint upon acrylic primers is fine. I don't even like to call them acrylic gessos, because a gesso is technically chalk. And original gesso, which was made from rabbit skin glue and whiting chalk, was desperately porous. And so, I mean, when I as an artist, I experimented years ago, and I prepared a nice panel and had it nicely sanded and smooth, and I made, you know, a beautiful gesso, real gesso layer on it with rabbit skin glue, and it looked, it was as milky as porcelain. As soon as I put a number on it, it just went boom, sunk dreadfully. And as I say, you want to make, when we're making these materials your friends, it's important, because what you don't want to do is be then having to sort of do things like oiling out or applying a retouch varnish, because that's when you're starting to fight the material. I personally, when I paint, I like to be able to put a brush stroke down and have that same brush stroke, not just tomorrow or a week's time, a month's time, 6 months' time, 6 years' time. I want it almost to be that I have to touch it to confirm it's dry. I mean, for me, I love the lusciousness, the moistness looking of oil paint. And for me, that's part of its beauty. Some of you might not, and of course there are various matte mediums that you can add, which will take that luster off and make it more satiny. And of course, when we can talk about varnishes and introducing consistency there like that. But coming back to the question, oil paint over acrylic is okay, in my opinion. It's one of those things that you might then want to consider the quality. Yeah, there are one or two excellent brands of acrylic makes out there. Don't always assume that all makes of acrylic are sound. You're building a painting in layers, from a physical thing that you're, be it a linen canvas with acrylic primer on, or a panel you are constructing. So you have to think about it. It's like building a house. You have to think about each of those layers and make sure they're sound. Okay, did I get it, Mark? Or
You did, yes. So brilliant. I'm going to move on to pigments and discussions around pigments and stuff. So there's quite a few questions on that. Jackie's posted twice asking about quinacridone. People are discussing that it's going to be discontinued. Is this
nothing?
No. Okay.
No. If Jackie would be kind enough to send me a link to whatever she might have read, if it's just artists talk groups saying those words, I've heard that. But if it's from someone in the industry, pigment industry, then I'd love to hear about it. I've not heard anything. I did hear industry talk last year that Alizarin Crimson was being discontinued and has been. I myself only knew of one maker of Alizarin Crimson, which was a Canadian company called Dominion Color. And fortunately, we were able to get an order in just in time. And I managed to get enough pigment, which will last us about 30 years, I believe. Colossal investment, but I had to do it because for me, it's a beautiful color. But no, I've heard nothing about quinacridones. But I'll be honest with you, I'm sort of a bit on the periphery of the industry. I mean, we are, as artist color makers, we're very, very small minions in the world of pigment consumption. The big consumers of pigment are the printing industry and the automotive industry, and they drive the needs of the industry. Quinacridone pigments do their jobs marvelously well. Very light, fast, interesting colors. What more can I say? There would be, I suspect, if they are going to be withdrawn, something else would be offered in their place, which would have equal performance, hopefully, or even more performance. No, Jackie, I've heard nothing.
Okay, that's great, and I'll let Vicky know about the Alizarin Crimson. Will be around for a while as well. So Kirk Larson, hi Kirk. He dropped a message at the beginning to say he started using your paints way back in 2013, and was even importing them and having trouble with customs at the time. But that's all been fixed now because you've got distributors in the US and North America. But he's asking, if I can find the question again, he loves the Scarlet Lakes.
Yeah.
What are the properties of Yellow Lake and Scarlet Lake versus, say, the Cad Yellow or Hansa Yellow or other versions of red or yellow?
Okay, well, nature again, they're going to be, the cadmiums are lean, and immediately if you had the two in your hand, you'd notice that. So the oil absorption of the pigment, it's a much, much thirstier pigment. And that's the case with those particular, what we call organic pigments. They tend to be very, very thirsty. Light fastness, not quite as light fast as a cadmium. Yeah, I think that's probably it. Incidentally, thank you for being a customer since 2013. If you'd contacted me, I'd have probably saved you the trouble of the import, because I think by 2001 we were selling through Blick and the Italian Art Store. So, but I'm flattered that you went to all the trouble of importing yourself. That's very kind. Thank you. Yeah, and of course, Yellow Lake and Scarlet Lake are transparent or semi-transparent, depending which one you're using. The cadmiums tend to be opaque. The other thing about a cadmium is that they, when intermixed with white, particularly the red, can be a little disappointing. It goes sort of, I mean, you've got to blame the titanium there. Titanium's not the most ideal, you know, if we're being really perfectionists about our colors. Titanium, although it's by far the most popular, is not the best of mixers. It would, particularly with cadmium red, it's inclined to look as if you've got a slightly dirty brush, or as if somewhere on the palette a little bit of blues, because it will tend to sort of go a bit grayish. You won't get a really zingy bright pink. You'll get a pink, but it's not going to be as brilliant to say as one of either Scarlet Lake or Pyrrole Red mixed with titanium white. Then you'll get a really zingy, you know, singing pink. The yellows, the cadmium yellow compared to Yellow Lake, yeah, really the fundamental thing is it's a lean color. The lakes are fat. The cadmiums are all lean because they're very heavy. They've got a low oil absorption. They're about 75% pigment in those cases, and conversely, the other way around, in the lakes, it's probably 25% pigment because they're very thirsty. They take up a lot of oil. I hope I've covered that one.
Okay, just looking around here for some, trying to group stuff together. So, 1 second. Yeah, a couple of questions about saying drying paintings. Obviously, it's actually curing it in terms of oil paint. So, is there a way to speed up that process? Somebody's asking about, could you use a UV light, 24 hours? What's you know, if you need to dry that, you know, paint quicker, what's the best way of trying to make that happen?
Warmth and sunlight. I don't know if actually saying UV light would. UV light, of course, is the thing that challenges the light fastness of the pigment. Whether it's actually the wavelengths that would actually speed that process of oxygen absorption, I'll be honest, I don't know. But warmth is always the key. So, you know, if you get a painting into direct sunlight, it's not going to do any harm, you know, for a few weeks, whatever like that. And heat is the fundamental. I mean, if you think about it the extreme way, if you're painting in a freezing cold studio in the likes of, say, Cornwall, where you are, Mark, and it's the middle of winter, and of course there's not very long, not a lot of daylight, and it's freezing cold at night, yeah, that's going to make it very long to dry. Conversely, if someone wants to find a way to make a painting dry slowly, that's the way to do it. Keep the painting in the cold. I know that with, I think Susie has got one of those paint garages where it's a three-dimensional palette that folds up in itself, a bit like a Toblerone triangle. And you have the ability to put cotton wool in there with clove oil on. Clove oil slows paint drying. If you add it to paint, it's 40 times as slow as linseed oil to dry. So you've got to be very careful if that's what you want to do. The only time that's really relevant is someone was asking about keeping a painting open for days so they could keep it moist. So, you know, a couple of drips of clove oil would help that. And I believe Susie puts clove oil onto these little balls of cotton wool, and they go into the palette so that they mean that her palette stays wet and open for the next day. No, to speed a painting, it's all about that heat. The heat is the fundamental.
Okay, thank you. You just caught me in the middle of typing a message to somebody. And the message was actually to say, somebody just came in, they came in late and they wondered, can they watch this again? So if you want to watch this again, because there's a lot of information here, you'll get an email on Sunday. And in that email, there'll be a link to watch this again. And you can go backwards and forwards and make notes and really, really understand what's being said here. So that's that. Questions wise, let's have a look. Also, Michael, I've sent a link to Karen with it's Gold. I think it was Golden Paints issued a product discontinuation updated on July 22nd, and it's saying a number of pigments are no longer available. So I forwarded that on, and you can have a look. Yeah.
It might be certain shades of quinacridone are going.
The
quinacridone thing.
PR 206, they're saying.
Oh yeah, that's been gone for some time.
Right.
Cinquesia Maroon. It's rather annoying because we added it to our range of watercolors as an equal to madder brown, and they then went and duly announced that they were ceasing that. Yeah, I've known that one's been gone for about 2 years. You see, there are big industrial makers like Sun Chemicals or BASF, and they make a range of Cinquesia, which are quinacridones primarily, and they, of course, are talking to the automotive industry, and they're led by that as to what colors they want to use. And a nice murky old brown, which is nice and fun for us, is probably not going to sell many cars, so they'll drop it. It's very frustrating because the acquiring of these pigments from around the world you're always going to be able to get things like iron oxides, which are the rusty colors. You're always going to be able to get ultramarine, the phthalocyanines, of course, because it's so used in the printing industry. But where it comes to the obscure things, I mean, it's only by the luck of that we can get lapis still. We import ours from Afghanistan. Vermilion's dropped off recently. I can't get vermilion at the moment. I make a variety of my own stacked lead white. That'll be coming back. I mean, there's always supply problems, and the thing is, the pigment industry, if you went to them and said, I want 1,000 tons every year, they'd listen to you. They'd make it for you, and they make thousands and thousands of tons of titanium white because it probably goes into all the wall paints in the world you can imagine, and so on. But where it comes to something, a particular shade of in that case, that Cinquesia maroon, pigment red 206, yeah, we can't do anything about it. You can make a replica of that, by the way, by using pigment red 122, quinacridone magenta, with transparent oxide red, which is the PR 101. And you can almost get a dead ringer for it there like that. I mean, that's going to be our alternative to go to once we use up that pigment supply. It's so annoying because it was such a beautiful color. And of course, we generally try and make single pigment colors because I think ethically we get asked for people want them as single colors. I know that people talk about convenience colors, which could be multiple pigment numbers, and we do plenty of them. But I always, when I'm selecting a color, I'm always driven, if I can achieve it with a single pigment, so much the better. It means that the color is going to be cleaner for you guys.
Okay, and with that, we're talking about new ways or new blends of pigments and so on. We have a question. Ken's asking about the Tunbridge Wells colours. So first of all, explain what they are, how they come to be, and what's happening in terms of your pigments that are available to the public.
Let me see if I can get up my. I'll read out which ones they are. In there, I've got a neutral grey, which is a mixture of pigment white 6, pigment brown 6, and
Michael, I'm just going to interrupt briefly there. So these are basically you have a whole new series of new colours coming out, which is what we're discussing here.
The thinking behind it was that when I was developing our watercolours, I got my hands onto so many new pigments, and half the time I was thinking, oh gosh, this would look great in oil, and I'd make a bit up into oil just for my own fun initially, and then of course I'd be looking and thinking, oh, the customers would love this. And before we knew it, we were sort of adding so many new colors. So it came out of the watercolors. And then because we've got 134 watercolors, and I think we were somewhere in the mid-90s with the oils, we suddenly realized if I was adding 40 new colors, it actually is in celebration of 40 years of making paint, because I think I first started selling paint in about 1982. So that's what we're sort of celebrating. So would you like me to read what the colors are for?
Yes, please. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so we have that neutral gray. Then we've got Turner's yellow, which is pigment yellow 216. It's a gorgeous color. I mean, whatever type of painter you are, but landscapes or portraits, it lends itself wonderfully as a flesh tone or a landscape color. We've got a brilliant orange, which is color index pigment orange 62. These you can find on our website. These are already on sale. Let me just come down through the list again. Rose d'Or, this of course is a replica of a Rose Madry type thing. And we've got pigment yellow 151 and pigment violet 19. That's a mix. Then I've got Wisteria, which is pigment white 6, pigment red 122, pigment blue 29, another gorgeous color. I mean, we find that colors like our pale violets are just sell like crazy. So we get sort of led by that as to what people, we're doing a shade of lavender as well. I mean, the list is there rather than me sort of, I think it's very boring to keep reading out color numbers. Phthalocyanine blue red shade. So that's a red shade blue. We've got a vivid blue, which is exactly what it says. Cadmium green, which will be a mix of cadmium yellow and viridian mixed together. I know you guys can do that, but you will not believe how often we've been asked for it. So again, it's a nice convenience one for those of you who like it. Moss green, which is deliberately designed. When we look at the color wheel, we find that there's still some big gaps in the greens. And unfortunately, things like cobalt greens or phthalo green, they don't address all the gaps. So this is why we did some blends with that. So we have a moss green, and that's the first 10. And then there'll be another section, which will be called Brick Lane, which we can talk about another day, which will be another one, another 10 to play with. As I said, you can find these on our website. And when I do OPA with you all, hopefully the more of you can come, the better. And we can meet face to face, and I'll demo them there and have them out so people can come along and play.
Brilliant. Now, I've posted a link to your oil colours page on the website, and at the top of that is the new Tunbridge Wells colours there, and you can see them. And the interesting one as well, and I know this, that the paint tubes, and you see the Michaels, actually is the paint itself is on the paint tube. It's painted onto the label. It's not lithographic printing, and a lot of care goes into the look and how they look on the website. So they try to be as accurate as possible. So it's a good indication of the colours there. So let's have a look. Flake white. Let's just go and dive into a different thing, because it's been around a long time. So flake white, describe it. What is it used for, and do you recommend it?
Okay, well, the term flake comes from when I make lead white in the old traditional way, and that's a pot with vinegar in the bottom, a coil of lead above, a loosely fitting lid which allows the air to come in and out, and buried under horse poop, believe it or not. What happens is when the surface of the lead corrodes, little white layers come away in flakes, and that's why they used to call it flake white. It's effectively a lead carbonate. We can also get industrially made lead carbonate, which is produced as by the I think it's the car battery industry uses lead salts as well, fortunately, and that's another part of industry where we're fortunate that we can actually get if you like, a byproduct from another industry. What's it used for? Well, of course, for me, the lead whites are, speaking as a painter, I mean, that's all my whites are lead-based whites, because I just love them. I find that you can get much sort of crisper, fruitier, zingy color mixes. When I was talking about titanium white with cadmium red, that's an example. If you put the cadmium red into a lead white, a flake white, in my opinion, you get a much more zingy, fruitier, sparkly, vivid color mix, more pinky. So, I personally just love the handling quality of a lead white. The only thing, you just got to remember not to eat it. I don't think I've never ever heard of an artist actually getting, with one exception, and I'll give an example of that in a second. I don't think I personally know of a single artist who's had a problem with getting lead poisoning, and has honestly come from the paint. I knew one artist who got heavy metal poisoning, and I said, "How did you get it? How did you get enough inside you?" And she said, "When I tell you what my technique was, you'll just despair." And she said, "I love collecting driftwood off the seashore. I take it back to my studio and I scorch it with a blowtorch." And I just thought, oh, no. So the poor girl had been working in an environment which was burning paint. and of course breathing it. She hadn't even thought about wearing a respirator mask. So understanding materials, no sanding, no burning, anything like that. It's just and clean your hands. Make sure you get no paint on your face as well. The trouble with lead whites is, and the reason why children eat the paint is because it tastes sweet. They used to call it sugar of lead. And believe it or not, they used to put, until I think it was the 18th century, I even heard that Beethoven, they think he was putting some lead white into wine to sweeten it. The Romans certainly did that. They didn't associate the fact that it would poison you. There we go. So don't drink it, don't eat it. Is that enough on that one, Mark? Do you think, or did I?
I think it is. Yeah. So slightly contentious topic for the next one. Water miscible oil paints.
Oh, yeah.
So there's a discussion to be had around that, but also the question is, well, can you, if you have them on your palette, can you use traditional oil paints alongside them? What's the impact of mixing them? What's your thoughts on water miscible oil?
Yeah, I mean, I think of, when I ask an artist who's a water mixable painter or painter, I normally get answers like, well, they're easy to clean up. I, of course, immediately say, well, if you want to make it really easy to clean up, don't start. But then that's my humor. I don't understand why, if you're wanting to paint like that, then paint with an acrylic or a watercolor. When I've painted with them, I'm quite shocked how you push them around and they're quite unresponsive. Yes, I can't see any reason why that you can't intermix them with, say, normal oil paint. But the more you do, of course, the less of that mixability with the water will be possible, I would imagine. I gather that it's because it's got lecithin in, and lecithin is one of Mother Nature's molecules, which allows it to grab hold of water as well as oil, and it's meant to be quite clever. But I think this is where our miracle medium has become very useful for people who don't like carrying a solvent around that has those tendencies. Now you've got something that is not going to give you, rather than having to use, say, water with your paint, you can use the miracle medium, and it's going to thin the paint and not give you a headache, and is not flammable. You can get on a plane with it in your hold luggage and things like that. No, I'll be honest, I think they're more designed for an amateur artist. And don't get me wrong, amateurs are welcome. It's just when I talk to most artists, they stick to the normal oil paints, I'm pleased to say. I hope I've answered that one.
You have, yes. So talking about mixing paints then, I mean, obviously within different traditional oil paint manufacturers, what are the implications of mixing between different manufacturers? So yourself and, say, another manufacturer. What do people need to look out for if they're mixing brands?
Nothing wrong with it in principle. The only thing, of course, is that when you say choose one of ours, if you say take a red of ours, cadmium red, and cadmium yellow from someone else, and you used to normally doing a 50-50 mix to get an orange, you'll find that, of course, because as ours works more like a concentrate because there's more pigment in there, you might find that it dominates the others. Sometimes people have said to me, oh, I squeezed some of your cadmium yellow out into my palette of whatever other brands, and the whole palette went yellow. And as if somehow I've ruined the situation, I point out to them, no, actually, the yellow embarrassed the other ones, actually, because of the power of them. But there we go.
Okay. You mentioned earlier, so I mean, basically just going to rattle through some quick questions here.
Sure.
Is apart from canvas, what other kind of surface would you recommend?
Wooden panels are fine. There's quite there's a very good movement for sort of the aluminium and copper-based things. I mean, if you think about it, a painting has got to last a long time, several hundred years. And the greatest challenge to a painting's life is probably house fire. Statistically, every house probably gets challenged by the potential of a fire from a falling over candle or whatever it might be. Every whatever years, the fire departments will tell you. But putting that aside, if you try and knock a hole through a linen canvas, you're going to produce a pretty hefty divot and possibly even go through. Try and put your fist through a solid panel, and clearly it's going to be much more. So in a sense, a solid panel is always got a better chance of the longevity. There's a whole multitude of companies making various surfaces there like that. From my point of view, of course, also make sure that the primer has been considered. That's a fundamentally important thing. And as I touched upon earlier on, when we have canvases which are very porous, the material's got to be usable. It's got to be fun to work with. You've got to like it. So make sure that when you're applying the paint, it actually works on those surfaces. Otherwise, you're just making it an unpleasant event. You've got to have a love of the material. I think I personally just love the smell of oil paint as well. That whole thing, it's like being a carpenter and loving wood. It's the same thing. You have to have an empathy with it as well. So some people say that they like the spring of linen, the drumminess. Yeah, absolutely. I get that. I paint both on linen and solid panel. These two paintings behind me are on linen, and I've used my own acrylic primers for those.
Okay. Speaking of longevity, Richard's asking that he's got some paint in tubes that are 10 years old.
Yeah.
Is there a use by date or a best before on a tube of paint?
No, I've got paint that I made in the 1980s. If you go to my website on our homepage at the moment, there's examples of our earlier labels, and some of those were made. Certainly, the older two were 1980s. And if you pinch the tube and it's still squidgy and malleable, you've got usable paint in there. Often when you've left the cap off, it'll just dry and seal that bit. Always put the cap on. Don't be surprised, of course, if you leave a cap off for 10 years and you come back 10 years later, it's dried. Well, that's because the oxygen's got in. If you prevent the oxygen getting in by putting the cap on, yeah, I inherited a set of my dear grandmother's paints in the 1970s that she'd been painting with when she was a student in 1911 in Goldsmiths in London. And sadly, I don't have them anymore, but yeah, and paint can last forever as long as it's sealed.
Okay, so loads of people will be going to the back of the cupboards and digging stuff out now, hopefully. I want to return briefly just to this idea about the full spectrum light when drying your paintings, i.e. putting it in sunlight and so on. Yeah. People are asking about if they wanted to speed up the process by having a bulb, would it be a daylight bulb or a UV bulb? Is it the action of UV or the action of the visible spectrum?
As I said just now, I honestly don't know. I put my hand on my heart, and there's some things I know and there's some things I don't know. I've been the first to say if I don't know, and I don't know that answer. Please experiment and let me know. I know that, of course, sunlight has got a huge spectrum of light waves, everything from UV to whatever else, other forms of radiation are there. It probably is the UV light that is actually the triggering influencer there, if you like. There's other ways you can consider this controlling your speed of drying, and as I said, choose colors which are fast drying. Viridian, transparent oxide red. In most environments, most summers, those guys, even painted modestly thickly, will start to be tacky and sticky by the end of the day. So, how fast do you want your paint to dry? In some ways, from a longevity point of view, a long and slow drying painting is, because what you don't want is, of course, violently drying fast and other paints drying slowly, because then you're going to get these sort of contradictions which would be exasperated by the fat over lean principle. I think that the easiest way is to consider your palette as a way of controlling that. And even then, if you've chosen titanium white number 2, which is linseed oil, and you put it on really chunkily and it's not drying, yeah, stick it in the sunlight. That's what I would do. Yeah.
Okay, and the follow-up always from about when the paint's dry is the varnish question. So, what varnish would you recommend? But more importantly, at what point do you recommend people varnish?
You know, this is such an interesting debate. I've got a good friend who has written a paper on this because he maintains it makes no difference. You know, as long as the painting's touch dry and you don't mobilize it with the action of applying the varnish. The most important consideration is that if you've used Damar glazes on your painting, and then you come back over and use a Damar varnish, which of course is effectively glazed without color, the layers combine. And that's why you'll see in some of the books, they'll say 6 months to a year, so that they're distinctly different layers. However, of course, a varnish has to be considered it's a sort of semi-permanent protective coating. The idea being that a restorer after 100 years or whatever will remove the varnish and the dirt comes away with it. The danger, of course, is if a restorer starts to remove a Damar varnish, they might also creep into the layers of the painting itself, particularly if a brown varnish is, a brown glaze has been used. It looks like dirt coming off in the cotton wool swabs, so they'll tend to keep going and you end up with an over scrubbed painting, as I call it. I want to do more varnishes in our range. There are some synthetic resins that a number of companies are doing, and I'll be honest, they're doing them better than our varnishes at the moment. And the beauty of those is that they can be removed by solvents that probably don't affect the paint. So I'm probably, I don't, how can I put it? I'd love you all to use my oil paint. I understand why you probably won't be using my varnishes. Although we make a Damar a Damar varnish, and we also make a matte varnish, which is made from beeswax and turpentine. They're just old traditional ones. So it's something which we're exploring more at the moment. But you'll find plenty of good varnishes out there, I must say. Again, it's your call on the time thing. This is still much of a debate. I might ask my friend's permission to, if he's willing, to put on our website his paper. For obvious reasons, I've got to ask his permission. But it's a really interesting debate, and his paper's it presents a very coherent discussion as to why it doesn't make any difference, the time thing.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm just going through, we've still got quite a few left, but I think we're getting towards the end of time. So again, I'm sure you will, so on Sunday, people who've registered and also those that attended now will get an email with a link to watch again. And we'll also put some extra links in there, and we'll put the email address in if anybody has any questions that they want to send through. Yep, we'll do that. So I'm just trying to see, the final one here is, I've got a series of questions with a little bit of confusion about this fat over lean. But it's not the fat over lean, it's actually identifying whether the paint in your hand or the tube of paint is fat or is it lean. Okay. Is it that it's basically being leaner or fatter than what's underneath or above?
You want the heavy, lean one underneath. The meat goes underneath, the fat goes on the top. I know it's confusing. Simple way to tell, a heavy one is a lean one, a light one is a fat one. So the lean goes underneath, the fat goes over the top.
Okay, and hopefully that will have answered those questions. So I think with that, we're on to time. I think this might be one of the longest webinars we've done. So I'm going to ask Liz to pop back in. She's going to close out for us here. So hopefully Liz is in the background and we'll start her video in a minute.
Thank you, everybody.
I'm here.
There we go. Liz, you're with us. There you are.
I am with you. Yes. Wow, Michael, thank you so much. I'm very glad that there is a recording of this webinar because it is just filled with very helpful information.
Oh, it was fun. Thank you. Thanks for listening.
It's wonderful. I love hearing you explain everybody's questions, and you're very knowledgeable, and we thank you for sharing that with our members and all the attendees. Everybody, yes, indeed, a coupon for a free $100 or 100 milliliter bottle of Miracle Medium will be included in the post-webinar email on Sunday. The coupon can be redeemed at the Harding's vendor table at next year's OPA convention. Coincidentally, registration for the convention opens on September 1st, and we're offering a $100 discount on full convention registration for the month or during the month of September. And this discount is open to both OPA members and non-members. But, you know, why would you want to stay a non-member when you can just apply and become a member and get your lunch and learns for free and so many other benefits like special treatment with the Hardings? So, you know, consider membership too. But we want to thank you all for coming, and thank you for the wonderful questions. And thank you again, Michael. It was wonderful.
Thank you very much, Liz. Thanks, Mark. Thanks the whole team there. Incidentally, just to reiterate, this doesn't have to be goodbye. You can email me any more questions. Don't be shy. There's no such thing as a silly question, so please. And visit our website. You'll find so much more information there.
And the question and your website and a whole bunch of other links are also going to be included in the email.
Thank you very much.
So thanks, everyone. Have a great weekend.
Thanks for listening to me.